front page news, so you couldn't miss it in the little news review. And so they were reading at home, and that's one time where they were not so positive about what was happening at the United Methodist Church, how the church was acting. They thought the church was doing right by splitting, and they were on the negative against the gays. Let's put it that way. They weren't positive gay, pro-gay there at all. And so, and me had been with Gala and all. I sure didn't want to speak up then and tell them anything, so I didn't.
The First United Methodist Church at that time was showing an awful lot of courage, wouldn't you say, Jim, in making this, making their chapel available for this. What year was that?
That was around 83. And so, and I would say that was they were very courageous, and so in this area. And so because it was, unless you were a logger or a mill worker, you weren't nothing, and being gay was totally different. And so, and it was like foreign to the people here, and churches for sure. The church I went to, which was Assembly of God, was if you were gay, you were a sinner. It was wrong, and so it was very, and that was, I'm sure that was probably the feeling of most churches. So. I don't remember too much about them speaking about it in church, but I heard about it at home when it was on the front page, and my family wasn't too positive about it. My mom and dad, my dad and stepmom, I should say, they weren't too positive, and so I didn't say too much at all. And so, and then later on, about the same year, about the same year, I ended up living at my mom's house and stepdad, and they weren't too positive about it either. And so it was two households and two negative households. So, but I still went to gala meetings, and that in '83. And so, but when where was I? Talking about that was a relapse, because I was up to when I was working at Casey's. You told me to tell my chronological story. So.
Right.
And so I think I'm around 19, and when I was at Casey's, working at Casey's I worked there for about 3 to 5 months. 3 to 4 months, and that's when he fired me again because of a shirt-tail relative who had done him wrong. He thought I was going to do him wrong, so he fired me, which was my first job that I got fired from. And so, because I had worked through high school and all, and it was real strange to be fired, let me tell you. And so I got fired, but I went back into Job Corps. This time I went to Springdale Job Corps, and I remember going there. I went in '84. I think it was '84. Yeah, it was '84, because it was about a year later, year out of high school. I went in, I think, around September, or beginning of September. I don't know the whole dates because it sort of sticks with me. But I'll get to that in a second. But I went to this Job Corps on my input day. I went in there, and then they picked me up from the bus station in downtown Portland. This Job Corps, Springdale Job Corps, is in Troutdale, outside of Portland, Oregon. Let's see. So we went to Job Corps and went on. Anyway, the day we went was payday for everybody that was there. I do remember that. And the driver that was taking us on said, she told us, she said, don't let anybody, don't give them anybody any money, because they already got it, and they just got paid, and they always hit the new inputs up, because we usually come in with money and they want to borrow it. And so that stuck with me. Well, after I got acclimated to the center and all, I went up to the store, and that's where I ran into these 3 guys first. And they wanted to borrow money from me, and I said no, because they told me to say no. And so I said no. Well, later on that evening, they got rough with me and tried to cause all sorts of trouble. Well, eventually, out of the whole story, is what ended up happening. About 2 a.m., my first night there, I was raped by these 3 guys. And so at this Job Corps center, when earlier in the evening, the Job Corps said, the RAs, residential advisors, had told me that nothing would happen to me because of what they had done, because I had turned them in for what them beating me, pushing me around and beating this other guy up. And so they were just 3 bullies, but they were also 3 guys that ended up raping me. Well, I blocked that out, and I almost, for 3 months, because that happened in September, and it was September, October, November, about December, early December is when I was almost medically terminated from that Job Corps, when this doctor asked me if I was gay. And I wasn't out to nobody, and I was really not really, I guess, out to myself, and I told him no. So I went back to my health, he released me and told me that they were looking at kicking me out of Job Corps, medically terminating me because I was costing them too much money. So I went back to my instructor and I asked her, why would he ask me that question? And so, because again, I hadn't told nobody. And that's when she told me that, well, sometimes when gay people have sex, this kind of problems you're having, that can happen. And that's when everything clicked, and that's when that memory of that night, the first night, come back to me. And I knew why I had blocked it out, because they had held a knife to my throat in this bathroom, and had told me that if I said anything, they would kill me, and I believed them. And so I blocked everything, and but when that came back, I told her I have to go back up to the doctor. And so I told the doctor what happened. Now, when you talk to a doctor, it's supposed to be confidential, and he ain't supposed to tell everybody else. Well, he did. And that was a day I will not forget, because I ended up having to make about 6 trips from the health occupations, my area, all the way back up to the administrative offices and talking to first time I had to go talk to the center director and the doctor. Second time I had to talk to the center director and a Multnomah County sheriff and the doctor. Third time I had to talk to an FBI agent because I was government property and they damaged government property. And it was a small center, and before long people were trying to figure out why I was doing this. Well, there was one guy still left on center, and they sent me home. They sent me home with an escort all the way back to Roseburg with an escort of protection. And for protection, for anything that may happen, they sent me home. And they ended up arresting that guy on center, and there was a big commotion. The students, because after a while they figured, like I said, it's a small center, and they figured out what had happened. Somebody leaked, or somebody overheard, or whatever. And they ended up arresting the gentleman, that's not the word for him, but they arrested him on center, and there was almost like a riot to get him off center. So I had a lot of student support there that I wasn't aware of until the president of student government called me at home and wanted to know how I was doing and all. And I had told him, my mom knew why I was coming home because the center director called her. And so I told him what had happened, and he told me what had happened on center, and so I felt good there. But then my stepmom, that's who I was with, that's the house that I went back to. My stepmom tried to convince me to drop out of Job Corps, and so to quit going because of what happened. And that's when I made up the mind that no, I wasn't going to quit. They weren't going to win, and I was going to go back and prove that I can overcome this. Still, I hadn't told my mom that I was gay. Still, that hadn't come up yet. But I went back to center, back to Job Corps, and ended up having surgery. That was supposed to be a day surgery, and ended up being in the hospital for 10 days because there was a lot more damage than what they knew about. But when I got out of Job Corps, that was right around Christmas, and I had to spend Christmas at Tongue Point. Well, after Tongue Point Job Corps, I went back, and they required that I go to counseling, mental health counseling. And that's when I told my counselor, my first day when I went in there, he wanted to know if I was homosexual, and I said, I believe I am, but if this is the way guys have sex, this is not what I want to be. Not that I could make a choice not to, but that's what I told him. I don't want to be gay, and so I'm not interested in this because this is that. You don't forget that. And I had a good counselor because the next week when I saw him, he had called somebody, and I believe, thinking back, it was from Phoenix Rising, which is a counseling group in Portland. He called me. He called two gay guys that come over and explained to me because I had only had a couple of sexual relationships, and it was nothing like this in sexual acts, which is not relationships, and it was nothing like